So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Happy New Year. Seems a little bit odd to be saying that at the end of January. I do apologise for the delay last year. I had a bad chest infection. I just couldn't function for the last few days of the year. But it's put us in a good place. Some of the features that we were going to talk about today were coming to the kind of end of their development cycle. So I can kind of give you a little bit more of a demo this afternoon. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Saunders. I'm the Contensis product owner. I work alongside Simon Horan, Chief Product Officer, and the development team. Been with Zengenti for just under 10 years now, and just manage and look after the roadmap of the product along with the team. So let's get straight into it. There's quite a lot to cover today. So 15.2 is our next release. For those of you interested when we're going to release, we're probably going to look at around the second week of February. So we are nearly there. So the first feature I want to touch on is Recycle Bin. Obviously, if you've been using content types and entries since Contensis 9, we haven't had that feature to capture any entries you've deleted and want to restore. If you were at the last webinar, you would know that we made a number of changes to our workflow engine to support scheduling, so publish and unpublished schedules. So Recycle Bin now is integral to our core workflows. So it's been added to our standard and our approval workflows now. And having done that work in the previous release just made this possible, this Recycle Bin feature and the feature that's going to follow much more straightforward for us to do. Deleted items and restoring deleted items is all based on permissions. So if you've got permission to delete a particular entry of a particular type, so if you're managing books or courses and you're allowed to delete those courses, you'll be able to restore them. System administrators, as normal, will see all entries in the Recycle Bin regardless of the sort of underlying permission model, allowing them to restore entries that may have been deleted by somebody who may have left the organization or in a different team. We introduced entry usage 2 or 3 releases ago now. And part of that release was about surfacing how entries are used and utilizing that data now that when you come to delete an entry, we tell you how many times that particular entry might be used by other content. So we get a better understanding of maybe a deletion that's taking place to say, in this example here, we've got a Roald Dahl author. He's being deleted, but it's telling us this entry is actually referenced from 21 other entries, so makes you kind of wonder whether you should delete it or not. We'll see in the demo in a little bit how you can go into view usage and actually see those entry references that this delete modal is talking about. We've set a rule that anything that is moved to the Recycle Bin will sit there for 90 days. And we're actually going to use the scheduling engine that we built for published and unpublished schedules to automatically delete that entry after that 90-day period. Within that 90-day period, you can restore that item and you can permanently delete that item if it's something that you don't want remaining in the Recycle Bin. Once it's left the Recycle Bin after 90 days, there's no way to retrieve that data. It's permanently gone. So here's just an example of the Recycle Bin showing the permanently deletes in. You can see that on the column on the far right, and we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in the demonstration. Obviously, entries now can be attached to site view, and when an entry is linked to a site view node, when you delete that entry and maybe come to restore it at a later date, you're going to want to know actually where was this entry attached. Now, site view can get really complicated in terms of supporting language variation, multi-language sites. An entry can be attached to more than one site view node. So we actually, we don't restore that. When you restore an entry, we don't restore it back to the tree, but we give you an indication of where that entry was previously attached in the entry activity panel that you can see here on the right-hand side. So that's Recycle Bin, but along with Recycle Bin, we've also been able to do the work around the ability to archive entries. So this is about storing content that may need to be referenced in the future or is temporarily not required, and that you might just want to bring it back at a later date. Again, it's integral to workflow. It's a first-class workflow property now, been added to our standard workflows and ties into roles and permissions again. So you can actually control who can archive content, who can unarchive content. And that's done through the roles builder. As you can see here, we've got an entry permission for the person content type, and they've got the archive, unarchive permission. So as I've touched on, why would you archive? Well, you might just want it for future use, but you don't want it to clutter your entries listing screen. The entries listing screen obviously shows all the content for your organization, depending on the permissions that you've got set up to what you see. But if you've got 300 courses, maybe at a later date that you don't want to show, you don't want to see those in the entry listing screen. So it reduces the clutter there. And it's great for keeping historical records of content. So let's go and take a look at this in Contensis and head over to Contensis. I'll just zoom in a little bit. So here we are in the entries listing screen. We've got a whole bunch of entries related to books and people. And as we saw in the screenshot in the presentation, we had this entry Roald Dahl. So let's go and delete this entry. And now here you can see that the entry of Roald Dahl is being referenced from 21 entries. So what is it referenced to? Like, how is it linked to other content? So we can go into view usage. This will open up the entry for editing and switch us to the entry usage panel. And now we can see the effects of deleting that single entry will effectively remove it from these entries once it's permanently deleted. So that might be a reason not to delete that entry in the first place. If you do happen to delete it, it will get moved to the recycle bin. So we'll delete that one. And that's headed over to the recycle bin. So the recycle bin is in a similar place that what you would have found in Contensis Classic. So head over to the cog and you'll see recycle bin in this list. And here you'll see a bunch of content that's in the recycle bin at the moment. So we've got this Roald Dahl entry. So you can view the content in the recycle bin. So if you've got lots of content in the recycle bin and you just need to double check, maybe you've got entries with the same name that you need to validate, you can still open these entries in a read-only mode. You can see that they are in the recycle bin. The primary action in the screen enables you to restore the entry. And I also mentioned that had this entry been attached to a node in site view, you can actually see it was in people and Roald Dahl in your site view structure. As you'll see here, it seems to be a schedule set to it, which seems a bit odd. Would you have a publish or unpublished schedule? But it's actually a permanent deletion schedule that's going to take place. And this is just to kind of, we wanted to surface that information so there's a clear understanding of what's going to happen, and to indicate it's also using our new scheduling service that we put into place. So I don't want to delete this right now, so I can restore that entry. So that entry gets placed back into the draft state. We don't know how, like within 90 days, content might have moved on, and this content might need evaluating before it's republished. So put it into that draft state for that content to be reviewed before you republish it and connect it. But as you'll see, when we go into the entry, the entry usage is still kept intact. So you haven't got to go and reconnect it to all these stories. It remained intact until it was permanently deleted. So that's the recycle bin. Similarly, we now support the ability to archive entries and unarchive entries. And so on the left-hand side of the entries interface now, you'll see this archived checkbox. And by checking that on, you'll get a view of mixture of content. Content is published, unpublished, and archived. And you can untick these if you just want to see archived content. So I've got these 2 entries that I've archived. And the same principle applies. You may want to review this content, so you can open up the content. And if you're ready to unarchive that content, you can do by clicking the unarchive option. So that entry will now go back into the unpublished state, into draft, ready to be reviewed, worked on, updated or changed, and clears it away from your entry listing screen. So that's the recycle bin and archiving entries, two requests that were top of our kind of customer request list that we've brought out in this release. So let's head back over to the presentation and continue. So one of the other areas we wanted to work on and haven't really had the opportunity to work on as we've been working on other features recently is around image fields. Images exist in most people's content types, and the way that those images could be constrained by their dimensions was only through fixed exact dimensions. So if you had a thumbnail image, you could only specify that that thumbnail image could be 1024 pixels wide by 768 pixels high, for example. Well, that's not particularly flexible in the variety of ways images may be used. So we've updated image constraints. Firstly, flexible constraints that can be applied on a single or multiple dimensions. So if you just want to specify the width or you just want to specify the height, you can now do that. So if we were to look at the content type builder where you would set this, we've got this example here of a feature image, and we're saying that a feature in an image in a blog post can only be a minimum of 720 pixels wide. So you wouldn't be able to upload an image that is smaller than that width. But if any image that exceeds that width could be used. We support a variety of ranges. So we support minimum, maximum, or exact dimensions, as you can see here. So anything that you previously had these dimensions set at when they were set at exact widths or fixed dimensions, as they were previously called, will be brought over into this format. So you'll see both the width and the height checked on, and the dimensions that you'd previously set populated. But if you wanted the height to be a maximum height, that could be switched over as well. So giving you the flexibility. Part of the reason that this change was quite a hard change to do is actually image dimensions fit into kind of 3 different areas within the interface. So there's the content type builder, actually defining those dimensions. And the next part is the image gallery. So when you open up the image gallery, when you had fixed dimensions, only images that would meet those fixed dimensions or could be cropped to those dimensions were ever displayed. But we've now needed to cater for all the different variations that could take place. So if you had a minimum width of 4,000, or in this case, something over 1,000, those are the only images that would be displayed in the gallery. And so we take into account all those different combinations, minimum, exact, maximum, and different combinations of those. I think there was about 50 odd testing scenarios, both in the image gallery through to the image cropping tool as well, which we're going to touch on next. So we've had to update the image cropper, which results in when an image is selected, that might be slightly larger than you were expecting. We had to control the the handles, the constraint handles on these, the dimensions within the image editor itself, how far you could zoom that image in and out. So you never had an image smaller than the requirements and pixelating that image. So you always end up with the highest quality version of that image possible. So the crop tool now adheres to all those different image constraints. So let's just have a quick look on how you set them, and we'll see how that works. So in the background here, I've got a content type for a blog post. So let's go and see the blog post content type. And my blog post is really simple. It's got a title, and I've got this article body field. And within that composer, I've got some rich text, and I've got two types of images. So a standard image in a blog today, you might only be concerned about the width of that image. Your designers come up with a really nice central column design, and you always want to ensure that the image that you insert into the blog post meets the width of that design. So with that image field selected, you can go over to the editor properties. And if you scroll down to dimensions, we can see here that the minimum width for that image has been set to 720 pixels. That's the width that the designer has set for that column on the front end site. So any image now that is selected and inserted at that point will have to meet that 720 pixel width. You might decide that you are wanting to insert screenshots, for example, and those screenshots have to fit into this kind of HD ratio image size. So you always want it to be sort of a 16:9 ratio image. Well, here again, I've set some minimum widths and exact heights to ensure that that combination of that 16:9 image will always be available. And then in the image cropper, you'll actually see that. So let's create an entry and just see the differences between these. So if I insert an image now, you can see that it's looking for a minimum of 720. So all these images in here now should meet that criteria. So we're not seeing anything under 720 pixels. So we've got a 777 there, so it's still within the range. So let's select one of these. Let's take Quentin Blake, for example. And we automatically scale down that image where necessary. So this obviously is fine in this scenario, it doesn't need scaling. So this is 4,000 pixels. So it would actually go out at 4,000 pixels because you haven't chosen to reduce it. And we could do it like that. So this is 2,444 at the moment. So that one works. But if we were to add a HD image, we'll see the crop handles will change. So it's now showing those images that are equal or larger to 720 by 405 pixels. So let's choose a different one that's not in the ratio and see what happens to that. So you see the image has been centered and cropped to meet that ratio automatically. And then we could choose to kind of move that down and just use that area of the image like so. So that'll update. And so that's allowing different image constraints. And this is really great if you've got things like a photo gallery and you've decided you're creating a photo gallery that's going to be used on iPads. And you might want to set the constraint of the height of the image. You always want images to be no greater than maybe 1900 pixels high. And you can now shape your content more appropriately for those different contexts and those different use cases. So giving you a bit more flexibility than you've had. So that's image constraints. So next new feature, ZenQL. So what's ZenQL? ZenQL is what we call Zengenti querying language. And it's provides the ability to search entries and different types of resources by building structured queries. It works alongside our API searches, or the searches in the following APIs in our delivery, our management, and our security API. And it allows you to locate content or users using this structured querying language. At the moment, it's through this HTTP query parameter called ZenQL. So in this example, we go into the delivery API of the project website, and we're looking at entries, and we're saying we're going to run a query. So what are those queries? Well, you may be interested in finding all entries that are of the content type book. So here we got sys.content_type_id equals book. And this first value you see to the left of the equal sign is part of the entry that is returned from the delivery API in the kind of JSON definition. So we've got sys.content_id equals book. But you could extend that query and combine it with another value. So find me all books, and where the entry title, and this little tilde means contains the word Charlie. So find me all books with a title with the word Charlie inside it. And we can extend that further. So a book with Charlie in the title, and where its version status is the latest version of that entry. So we can build on it further, or change the query slightly and say, find me all books where they were recently modified starting from the beginning of this month. So find me all entries that have been updated since the beginning of January. So let's go and look at this in practice, and then let's see how this can be used beyond the delivery API as time goes on. So for this demonstration, I'm going to use Postman. Postman is a tool for basically querying APIs and bringing us back a list of results. And so what I'm going to do now is I've got a series of queries set up here, and hopefully I've zoomed in enough for you to be able to see. So the first query is saying, get me all books of the, get me all entries of the content type book. So here's that query parameter that I mentioned right at the beginning, ZenQL equals, and I'm now saying, go and find me all entries of the content type book. So if I take this out and I send that query, what I get back now is they're saying there's 45 entries that meet that criteria. So there's 45 book entries, and each of the entries here are displayed. But what you may see is that there are different versions. There's the latest version and published versions of the same books. So I'm going to extend that query a little bit further so we can clean things up. So we're going to say, find the book, and so find all books where their version status is latest. So if I do that, you can now see it's got a total count of 23. So it's got rid of the published ones, and I'm just looking at the latest versions of that entry. But we've got a load of extra data that I don't really want to see here. I just want to see the names of the books. So just going to add this in our delivery API. You can pass another parameter that allows you to specify what fields are returned. So I'm just going to ask for the entry title now. Too many T's. So here we are. I've just got the entry titles back for those 23 entries, and it's found me all the books: Midsummer Night's Dream, Our Sweet Mystery of Life, Billy and the Minpins. So it's a really powerful kind of structured querying language to help you to kind of find information based on the entries that you have in the system. So in the presentation, I also showed you this little element here. So find me any book that contains the word Charlie inside the entry title field. So I specified a field here, and I've given this operator of contains, and then I've passed a value that I want to search. And we're going to carry on using the version status latest and just show the entry title fields now. So if I press send on this, I should now only get 2 books returned. So I've got Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. So it's quite a natural language to use rather than sending the query as a JSON query. And one more. So find me all books and all book entries, but find me any that have been modified since the beginning of the month. And again, show me the latest version and limit it to the entry title field. So now I can see there's only 2 books that have been modified since the beginning of January inside my entries inside this project for the webinar. So a really powerful language with lots of different functions that are going to enable you to create really custom queries about your data. So these are available in the API from 15.2. So a developer can utilize these right now. There's some new search functions around dates, which are all documented, which I can point you to. We haven't published out that documentation yet, but I can pop that into the webinar channel once that's live. But all those new functions, date functions, will be available to the normal searches as well. So why do I feel like this feature is particularly exciting? Maybe a querying language to most isn't overly exciting, but if you've used Contensis for a number of years now, you might be familiar with the content reports that exist in Contensis Classic. And a lot of those reports are based on custom SQL procedures in the background that enable you to kind of query the data in Contensis. So up in the top right-hand corner of the screen, there's a reports button, and there's a series of reports that you can do. You could request us to build those reports for you, or if you've used the Contensis search in Contensis Classic, we had this kind of UI builder that allowed you to start building these kind of conditional queries. But it didn't allow you to go to the extent of what we're supporting in ZenQL. So later on this year, we plan to release a new search screen. Now, this search screen is actually already in a basic prototype form where our CAMS team are already using it in Contensis. And they can actually use this ZenQL querying language to return entries and get some data out that they utilize, because we've built a CRM within Contensis itself, so they can retrieve that data. This search bar at the top, we hope to be using IntelliSense, so that kind of, as you start typing, provides you these suggestions that you're seeing here. So I've put the content type, and these are available operators. Some of those don't align with the actual content type ID example here, but to give you a flavor of the ability to kind of select things that are provided to you. And we've been building this IntelliSense using a separate passive package, NPM package, using a system called Antler to define all that language. So that's in progress at the moment. And we're also in the process of doing a series of work around the UX. And some of this stuff you see on the left-hand side has got kind of save filters, which we're doing some work on at the moment. So that's to come. And that's why we're really looking forward to releasing ZenQL. So from 15.2, it's available in the API, all the functions are there, so you can start using it in code. But it's going to become really powerful for developing custom reports and searches on your content in Contensis. It's also going to be exceptionally helpful in our entry pickers. So if you've been building content models for some time now, you'll know that you can link content together using entry pickers, creating linked references to other entries. So a really basic example is a book with an author. Well, at the moment, when you have an entry picker like this, where it says select an entry, you actually define what content types you want a user to select entries from. So in this example, it's just people, the person content type. But we know that there are many situations where people want to select content, but only a subset of that content. So let's have a look at an example. So you might have a something that you want to allow people to select events in an entry picker. But you only want events that are currently published. So here we've got where the content type ID equals event and is published equals true. But also those events can only be in the categories walking, cycling, and archery. Well, that will be possible once we introduce ZenQL and add it to our entry pickers. You'll be able to scope the content that is returned in that entry listing. Similarly, you might have a video site or a blog all about videos or a landing page that you want to kind of display different content on. Well, here you could say, find me all videos that contain a rating between a 3-star and a 5-star using this querying language. So again, the users will only be able to select entries based on that kind of criteria. And another example, show me all plants in the entry picker, but where the price is between £3 and £10. So that's ZenQL, a really powerful feature that's going to enable us to build reporting, will allow us to really kind of scope down the content that your authors can select. And we think it's going to be a really powerful feature moving on. Okay, so those are some of the kind of core features that are coming out in 15.2. But we've been working on lots of different areas in the CMS, and we're always making tweaks and improvements to the product. So one of the first things that we've done is we've moved the content guidelines. So when we first built the entry editor, the content guidelines for the field used to be placed below the primary sort of editor area. Now those content guidelines are placed above the field editor below the label. We're finding that some editors, you didn't always get those content guidelines until the field was focused. It was frustrating. And actually for an accessibility improvement, we've actually tied in the label and the content guidelines text to aid screen readers understanding it, which got missed previously when it was hidden below the form field itself. So yeah, just a closer look. We've done a lot of work around the performance of SiteView. Some of you have been working SiteView hard with some really deeply nested structures with many thousands of entries. So we've completely refactored SiteView. A good number of releases ago, we released the Events API, which supported server-sent events. And we've actually utilized server-sent events in SiteView now to provide live updating of tree data. So we're not making so complicated queries back to the original data source to kind of update the content constantly. So SiteView will now update automatically where slug names, for example, may change. You'll see those changes live while you're utilizing the interface. We've had to add a number of additional queries into our node API to get things like grandfather nodes in the tree, and we've worked really hard to kind of make this much more robust and performant in kind of larger sites now. As part of that work, we got to introduce some new webhooks and some new server-sent events. So we've added support for understanding when a node menu has been reordered, when nodes are being moved in a SiteView tree, when you restore an entry from the recycle bin, and when you archive and unarchive now. So you can pick up webhooks for all of those kind of actions. We've also added a few new context menu actions in the entry listing screen and in SiteView. So if you've got an entry in the entry listing screen and it's got a preview assigned to it, you can right click on that entry now and say, preview this entry. We've also enabled the opening a new tab functionality. So those of you who are opening multiple entries in separate tabs to work on can do that from the context menu as well now. We've also added support for the ability to duplicate inline components. So we've got some customers who've got custom components built and they've got an array of those components that some of the data is very similar that they just need to make tweaks. So you can now duplicate component fields within a component array. And also, for those of you who use inline entries a lot, especially around like university courses where certain data might be specific to a particular cohort for the year, you can now duplicate those entries inline as well now. So you can be editing the course entry. You can find that maybe course detail that is slightly changed for a different cohort, duplicate the entry and just make the changes inline without having to go back to the entry editor, duplicating it, going back to the entry and attaching it. So you can now do that. We've also seen the need for some customers to be able to prevent certain data going out in the delivery API. So one of these pieces of data, for example, might have been the owner of an entry. So through the delivery API today, if you've got data going on the front end, that entry data is being displayed, and there's certain content that we push out with those entries all around the sys object, all the system fields. And one of those is owner, and we know that some people want to hide certain data from being presented on the front end. So now for a project, you can go in and you can exclude a lot of the data against this within the sys object itself. There are some exclusions. They're documented and they're also shown in the UI when you're validating. So you can't hide the ID, you can't hide the language, you can't hide the core URI. But now you can use wildcards and hide certain data from going out in the front end. So it just won't be available in the delivery API. So that's the kind of core updates to the product. But John has been working exceptionally hard at the end of last year, continuing to work through making Contensis more accessible. So we gathered a report from the Digital Accessibility Centre looking at about 12 to 15 different primary journeys that customers use in Contensis. And all of the changes from that report are nearly completed and close to being retested. And we continue to kind of strive to kind of make all our work accessible now. In our design reviews and our design drop-ins, there's lots of discussion on how we make in this particular new screen accessible. So yeah, we're continuing to work with the DAC on this, and hopefully we'll have a retest in the coming weeks. And there's a whole bunch of developers across the organization going to be joining the DAC for a series of accessibility training in screen reader understanding and using assistive technology, as well as some of the bottlenecks in certain components and uses. So we're equipping the team and we're building this into all our processes now, and things are looking much, much better. So what else can you look forward to in 2022? This is not a definitive list. It's not a complete list, but some of the stuff that we're currently working on. So save views, the ability to search for content in your entry listing screen, change the columns that you see and save that for you to be able to just recount each time you kind of come back in to the product. So a little bit of a sneak peek into that. So we've got a new views tab next to the search screen where you can show all your views, or maybe views that are specific to that project. Some of this is still being ironed out, but the UI is in a kind of good place. We're doing a lot of testing around that, and some of the architecture behind saving these views is being looked at, along with other kind of settings that you might want to save across the system. So that's saved views. We're also continuing work on canvas editing. So those of you who joined us on the last webinar, if you didn't, maybe catch up by watching it back on our website. But canvas editing is about creating structured long form content in a completely new editor. And this editor in time will replace our rich text editor and our markdown editors. So we've actually defined an entirely new specification and storage format for all the different types of content that you'd want inside a canvas editor. A lot of that has been approved across the team There's just a few areas where we need further discussion. So that will be supported by our content API, and the UI will continue to be built out to support that. We've also worked on a bunch of new kind of inline UI components, so like text selection and changing stuff to kind of bold after you've made your selection and stuff. So all that is underway, so that's continuing. We've got somebody working on that kind of full time after 15.2. During lockdown last year, and I don't mean the pandemic lockdown, but in our company 48-hour lockdown project, a few of us looked at bringing Zapier integration to Contensis. For those of you who don't know what Zapier is, Zapier allows you to connect a product to many thousands of other products to create different kind of automations. So for example, if you had a Google Sheet, and from that Google Sheet you added a film, we could generate an entry in Contensis from that Google Sheet. Or if you'd created an entry inside Contensis and you wanted it to update a Google Sheet, we could do that. It's not limited to Google Sheets. You can use Slack. There's about 3,000 plus different products available on the Zapier platform. And we've proved that we can connect all that up with Contensis, and we will be working on that later on as well. So just a quick recap. Today we've seen the introduction of the recycle bin. We'll automatically delete entries after 90 days. Archived entries for future reuse or for historical reference. The ability to set different image constraints on different image fields by a single dimension, multiple dimension, and different kind of ranges of dimension within that. The idea of ZenQL, a new querying language to enable you to easily define queries, not only to use in our delivery API today from a code perspective, but to begin to layer in reporting features and scope content in entry pickers. We continue to make lots of updates for accessibility, and we're continuing to test with the DAC. As I mentioned, we'll be looking at save filters more in the coming weeks, as well as layering in a new ZenQL search screen for you to look at to find different types of content. So lots going on, lots to look forward to this year. So again, if you're not part of our Slack community, join that. If you've got any questions, feel free to just use the Slack community to ask those questions so everyone kind of gets the answers. But for now, thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, happy to answer them.